Good evening and a warm welcome to the second part of your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa. And tonight we're going to go straight to a studio discussion, and it has everything to do with the politics of secession. We're not going to focus just on Kenya, but across the continent that is Africa. And tonight we have our guest in studio, standby, ready to, to go into detail as far as this debate is concerned. We have Honorable Peter Kaluma, Homa Bay Member of Parliament. We also have Honorable Owen Baya, he's a Member of Parliament from Kilifi North. Joining us from our city centre studio is Mr. Kosti Madibe, who is a former Minister of Finance from South Sudan, that is the youngest nation in Africa, and from Garissa in northern Kenya. I'm going to talk to Abdul Wahab Sheikh Abdisamad, who is a Regional Affairs Analyst. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the show. So let me start from our city centre studio, and that is where Mr. Kosti Madibe, former Minister of Finance from South Sudan, is. Mr. Madibe, from your own experience, understand you've been part of the freedom fighters, fighting, alongside the late Colonel John Garang in attaining South Sudan's independence. Fast forward to 2017, how would you rate the youngest nation in Africa? Have your expectations perhaps been fulfilled?
First, thank you for inviting me for this show. The expectations of the people of South Sudan were fulfilled when the referendum took place and the independence of South Sudan became a reality on July 9th of 2011. But given the events that have happened since then, especially from December 2013, I wouldn't say that the expectations of South Sudan have been fulfilled fully. Instead, there has been really betrayal of that expectation.
Yes.
As war has raged now internally among South Sudanese themselves, a war that almost everybody agrees is absolutely senseless.
Yes, and that is where I'm going. Allow me to pose my second question, Mr. Madibe. And the people who are saying, the reason as to why South Sudan separated from the north is because of historical injustices, because of inequality. Now that we're seeing some sort of an implosion within South Sudan, various factions fighting for power, is it a move you regret, perhaps, separating from the north?
No, I don't regret in the least. But as our former chairman, Dr. John Garang, said, that you see that discrimination, that colonialism, that injustice knows no color.
Yes.
A person of the same color with you can be an oppressor just as much as a person of a different color. And I think that is what South Sudan is going through right now.
Yes,
it's
allow
no
me to engage Mr. Abdul Wahab.
From the north, but it is oppression from the south.
Yes, allow me to engage Mr. Abdul Wahab, who's coming to us from Garissa. Now, the South Sudan case, there's some observers who are saying that it will remain as an exception rather than a precedent. And it seems there's some sort of an unwritten law by the African Union, the international community, opposing any move for any region to secede. Why is that the case?
Hussein, it's very unfortunate. The African young nation in South Sudan just got independent just 3 years ago, now go into Somalia way. That's why most of African states, people now are asking for, succession is another issue, but are they going to meet the aspirations of the people? Now, South Sudan, are they better than before? Today, South Sudan became an independent state. Are they better than today what they are just 4 years ago? Another case, another good example is Eritrea. They succeeded from Ethiopia. Are they better now? So sometimes succession is not, cannot meet the aspirations of the people. That's what I'm saying. If you look at Africa, case by case, for instance, in Mali, you know, the Tuareg society are fighting for independent state, to call as the word state. Biafra is another, you know, classical example. When Nigeria also, the Igbo society, they are looking for own independent state. Leave alone all those issues. Even the Coptic society today in Egypt, they are looking for what they call a Coptic state, just similar to, you know, Vatican City in Rome. So the question is, what went wrong? Why the African societies are now looking for successions? Mainly, you know, African Sub-Saharan Africa must practice what they call a good governance. If there is a good governance, then the succession of the, what they call succession of the issue will be, you know, it's not the case.
Yes.
For instance, what's a good governance?
Abdul, we're going to discuss more the reasons.
Accountable, transparent, responsive.
We're going to discuss more the reasons why these regions, you know, want to secede from their motherland. But allow me to engage Mr. Kaluma, Honorable Kaluma, is a member of parliament from Homa Bay and part of the NASA, which has now changed its name to NRM, the National Resistance Movement. They have also reignited the agenda for self-determination. Now, Honorable Kaluma, from Abdul Wahab's perspective there, as well as the former minister from South Sudan there, it seems secession might just be a risky move. Why is NRM even considering it, by the way?
Yeah, let me first start by correcting the appearance that NRM has a position on secession. Let me assure the nation that at no meeting of NRM have we discussed the possibility of seceding.
Yes.
This thought of secession, if you can remember, was first mooted by me at an official level. And I wrote to the IEBC proposing a referendum to redraw the territory of Kenya. Because unlike other nations, we are mentioning Kenya's provisions in terms of how, you know, the idea of secession can be executed. Of course, there is no response from IEBC to date. But I can tell you that if you study keenly the reason that will fuel secession in any country, it is a feeling by a section of that country that they are either dominated or they are suffering injustice or the condition has just become insufferable. Ideologically, the country has not gelled. What a country needs to do is to have their values and keep to it. So if you see what is happening in South Sudan, the youngest country, for instance,
yes,
the people should be asking, how come there was no problem when Kanogarang lived and presided over the country? And how come we are seeing this problem under the current administration? And you will discover that it is possible that Kanogarang had a grand and a clear vision or idea as to why, you know, Southern Sudan had to be. So it's a matter of recalling, you know, those values and keeping to them. I would not say it is a risky thing. What I'm saying is that in any society similar to the situation we have in Kenya today, secession offers us the best way to move forward.
Yes, I think that is debatable. We're going to discuss that in detail. Now, Honorable Baya, I understand that, of course, Coast Region is the home to the MRC, the Mombasa Republican Council, who for a long time wanted, you know, the Coast Region to separate from Kenya. And then last week, there's also some, you know, comment from a section of coast leaders who also wanted, you know, are asking, you know, to secede from Kenya. And then we have the NRM call. How is it different? How is the coast, you know, leaders' call for secession different from that of NRM or some leaders in NRM as well as MRC?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me for this program. One thing that I need to make clear is NRM does not have a position on secession, and therefore it should, secession calls should not be attributed to NRM just because the champions of secession in this country seem to be coming from the political wing that is NRM. So that is one. Secondly, MRC's position on secession is completely different from the current calls that are coming from politicians. MRC set itself out from a very militant position and also set itself out to battle it in courts. Again, you see that the way they came in They came in from a position of looking at what the Sultanate was about and the relationship to Kenya or Kenya colony at that particular time. Now, the difference is that currently the members of parliament and politicians that are pushing for this have a position that the coast has been franchised first as a political unit, and therefore the votes that are within coast cannot give them a share within the Kenyan nation. They cannot have electoral power enough to really bargain for a share of the Kenyan cake. Secondly, the cost, if you want to study, if you want to talk about Kenya, you need to define what Kenya is. Now, the first parameter you need to ask yourself is, what is Kenya? Kenya is amalgamation of two nations at independence. That is what was the Kenya Protectorate and the Kenya colony. These two nations came together to form the country and state called the Republic of Kenya, with a specificity that one of them was that Kenya will be governed on the Majimbo premise. The coast joined fully-heartedly, knowing that Majimbo would drive the agenda of Kenya. 1 year later on, President Jomo Kenyatta then decided to do away with Majimbo and looked at a centralized unit, and therefore, at that particular time, that's where the rain started beating us. That Jomo Kenyatta forcibly removed Majimbo, which was the reason why the coast came into knowing that their rights to land, their rights to their resources, their rights to electoral power was based on the Majimbo principle. But when that was curtailed, the coast person remained in limbo up to today. And that's why this force that is coming now is premised on the earlier proponents of Majimbo.
Yes. Now, Honorable Bai, I think you've delivered your point, but the question is, the most Kenyans are asking, why did a section of leaders from the coastal region resort to secession? Have they exhausted maybe other alternatives, perhaps?
Yes, alternatives have been exhausted, because one of the alternatives that many people will talk about is devolution. But devolution is more of a developmental agenda than a political agenda. If you look at the county governments that we have, they are more developmental. Politics, as in real national politics, do not play at the devolved unit. It's about you get money, you do development projects, but the political aspirations of the people of the region are not catered by devolution. So that argument that devolution and therefore county governments have come in to really appease the cost because of that does not hold water. What holds water is one thing: the political aspirations and ambitions and the future of the people of the coast was cut when their political will, which was enshrined in the Majimbo constitution, was cut off.
Yes.
Today, the development of the coast and the people of the coast feel that they're not part of a country. Now, when you have a country where people feel that they are oppressed by the people governing the country, when you know that your thoughts and your ideas and your aspirations are not respected, and therefore the dignity of the people at the coast has been injured for many years, then we say, truly, I think that union now needs to be reviewed. And a review of that union means self-determination as provided in international law.
Speaking about self-determination, Honorable Ba, there are many, of course, who come from the school of thought that, secession or, separating from the motherland is not always easy. And I think the person who is in the best position to explain to us what it really takes for a region to separate from its motherland is none other than Mr. Manibe here. Now, during your struggle for independence, Mr. Manibe, how difficult was it for South Sudan to separate from the north?
Of course, it was extremely difficult. First, position of the African Union that didn't allow borders to be changed was the number one hurdle. I think from the discussions that we have had so far, it will continue to be a hurdle for a long time. But I think the point that is being missed is that African countries, as we found them at the time of independence, were constructions that were done by colonial powers. They drew the boundaries on their own to serve their own interest. When independence came, the issue of nation building was never addressed in most countries. And this is where the problem lies.
Yes.
So long as that agenda is not addressed and the country is presumed by the political elite that inherited power to be already a nation.
Yes.
And then it will continue to be a problem because then you will not mold the various nationalities that are in the country into one nation.
Yes.
Without doing that, the issue of secession will always continue arising from time to time once certain nationalities or groups of nationalities find that they are not being treated as though they belong to that country on equal terms with any other group
yes.
there.
Now, Honorable Kaluma...
That is the problem.
Yes, let me engage Honorable Kaluma. And from the minister here from South Sudan, clearly it's not easy for any region to secede from their mother. And of course, there are restrictions by international bodies. AU, of course, they have some sort of an unwritten law in opposing any kind of such move. So when a section of NRM leaders, you've clearly stated that NRM does not stand for that. So the section of leaders, among them you yourself, who are calling for this kind of move, it seems clearly it's not a walk in the park.
Yes. There are two ways of successfully seceding. Invariably, some are violent or war-based. A number of them are also peaceful. If you can remember how the Republic of Finland was created from the former USSR, for instance, it's a peaceful agreement. And I want to tell you that we have the United Nations human rights law, we have the African Charter on self-determination, actually on human and people's rights. The reason as to why the African Union is hesitant to allow easy secession is that the African Union has become largely a body of the presidents. And you know, as a president of a country like Kenya, if you are told a part of it is going elsewhere, of course, these taxes and the resources you have control over will diminish in terms of extent. So that is natural. The unique position in Kenya is that, unlike in most countries which have successfully seceded without clear procedures in law, Kenya has very clear procedures. And if you look at Article 255 of the Constitution in terms of those matters which require amendment by way of referendum. One of them is redrawing the territory of Kenya. If you want to redraw the territory of Kenya in any way, you already define it, you simply do a bill, which I think I'm in the process of doing. Present it to IEBC. IEBC, it being a bill presented by popular initiative, as just to process the referendum process, in which case the people who are for secession, the people who are against, of course, proceed to campaign, and people go to vote. If, of course, the vote on secession fails, then the people who are so determined, to secede, believing that the situation in which they are is insufferable, can still, pursue other means. So I'm saying that... But
Honorable Kaluma, with due respect, of course,
yes.
One of the bone of contention by the NRM, initially it was NASA, is that they boycotted the election because they didn't want the IEBC, as it was constituted, to oversee any kind of election. Let's talk about the referendum you're talking about. Hypothetically speaking, when the same electoral body is in place, then does it mean that, NRM is going to trust whatever result that is going to come out?
Let us worry about that as we go forward.
Thank you. Now, let me pose another question to Abdul Wahab here. And Cameroon, Nigeria, Western Sahara, Somalia, Morocco. The list is endless. Why are we seeing an increasing separatist voices in the continent?
Ibrahim, we have to differentiate two things, democracy and good governance. Sub-Saharan African leaders must practice what they call a good governance. Good governance is, what they call consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective, efficient, equitable, inclusive, follow the rule of law. And also, it assures that corruption is minimized and the views of the minority are taken into account. and that voices of the most vulnerable society are heard in this decision-making process. And also, you know, it is also responsive to the present and future needs of the society. And in fact, we have to differentiate two things. In Africa today, what we call a good governance and democracy. For instance, in Arab nations, like Qatar, Saudis, there is sort of good governance. There is no democracy there. So democracy cannot bring what we call a good governance. So the problem now we have sub-Saharan Africa is, you know, there is no good governance. That's why if we have one of the, Kenya today has one of the best constitutions in the world. But all these issues I have mentioned here, it's enshrined in the constitution. But if the constitution implemented to the letter, then those voices you are hearing from the secession and so on and so forth will not be an issue. The problem is African leaders must come up a framework whereby they are going to practice a good governance, you know, address the historical injustices. That's why the African continent, from north to south, from east to west, from Marrakesh to Mobutu, from Senegal to Somalia, people now are calling secessions all African continent, even including what they call South Africa. That's why if the current leaders address historical injustices, they address what they call, you know, they share the resource equitably, I think all those, rebellious, to be a part, it can easily contain, or it can easily, what you call, confuse the people, as long as our leaders are not practicing good governance.
Yes, Abdul, I think you've delivered your point. Good governance.
As long as our leaders, they don't take care of the constitutions, then such kind of succession will be.
Yes, I think you've delivered your point. Now, Honorable Baya, let's not look into circumstances that led to separation in these African countries who've separated, but let's look at what happened next. If you like it, let's call it, the separation legacy. It doesn't look very rosy, especially if you look at South Sudan and maybe Eritrea, which is still struggling with, its image outside there in the world. So, do you think this is a risky move?
I want to tell you this. One of the things that we need to look at, the countries. Southern Sudan pursued secession from a more militant position. It pursued secession by having an army, by having many things, and there was conflict that lasted many years, probably the longest conflict in Africa, on continent Africa, towards the secession, because the powers that be did not provide a constitutional mechanism towards achieving separation or self-determination. And therefore, that war became very long because of that. We have, what we had in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Eritrea kind of took advantage of the situation in Ethiopia because of the conflicts that were already in Ethiopia, and therefore very quickly organized themselves, and Eritrea as a country was born without much conflict, and therefore you can see it's a more stable country because they followed a path that was not followed by Southern Sudan. If you go to the United States, Texas itself as a state has always wanted to secede, but they have tried to do it very constitutionally within the Constitution of the United States. And this presents a picture, again, if you go to what is happening in Spain and the Catalanians, they are following law. Kenya is a constitutional country with laid down procedures on how to do things within the Constitution of Kenya, alongside as provided in Article 2 of the Constitution, where Kenya recognizes international law and international regulations and treaties. I do not foresee a situation in Kenya where we can have the path that walked by Southern Sudanese as the path that will be walked up here in Kenya.
So Kenya's situation is different?
Kenya's situation is different because of the constitutionalism that rules this country. The rule of law, constitutionalism, governs this country, and any responsible citizen, and even those that are pushing for cessation at the coast, are responsible citizens who are abiding by the Constitution, and we look at constitutional provisions and international law and treaties on how to get out and really create the new state, probably the newest state in Africa.
Yes.
That is the state of coast of Kenya.
Yes, Honorable Kaluma, I'd like to pick your thought on this. And, you know, the main reason for separation in these few examples that I've mentioned, the different countries that, you know, several regions want to separate from their motherland is, you know, historical injustices, inequality, and the list is endless. Does it mean that the rest of Africa is governed well, or we're sitting on a time bomb?
No, not necessarily that, you know, the populations which are silent in other nations are governed well. Mm-hmm. As I've said, it must come to a situation where you evaluate where these inequities you are talking about can be addressed. When we propose secession for Kenya, mm-hmm. we are saying we are in a state where, looking at the law, and the situation in the country, it is impossible.
And Honorable Kaluma, it's important to make it clear that is not NRM stand, right?
Yeah, that is not NRM stance. In fact, let me clarify that I don't know why our principals in NASA and NRM believe so much in one united Kenya going forward. It is the individual stance of other leaders. Mm-hmm. But what I was clarifying is that it must reach a situation where people are saying the domination, the injustices, the abuses coming from the union cannot be, you know, dealt with or addressed in any other way. Mm-hmm. That you are saying we want to separate and see how we move forward if we can live by the values. And that really is the situation in Kenya today.
But Honorable Kaluma, from Abdulwahab's perspective there, from the former minister from South Sudan, Kosti Manibe, it seems it's not easy for any region to secede, especially now at this moment. You've seen Somaliland since 1991 up until now, they're yet to be recognized. The same case with South Sudan, it took them decades. So clearly it's not going to be easy.
Yes, I think my brother in Parliament had clarified that unlike those other states, we have clear procedures locally. I also indicated that, you know, in our constitution, we import and apply international conventions and treaties. The fact of the matter is that self-determination through secession is a human right under the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the African Charter itself. What we are dealing with in terms of Somaliland and others is failure by the United Nations to give recognition. It does not, you know, take away from the fact that they have determined to be a nation.
What makes you believe that perhaps the People's Republic of Kenya is going to be recognized easily?
I do not want to say it will be recognized easily. Mm-hmm. What we seek to uphold is our power to self-determine. Mm-hmm. And our belief that every institution, whether local or international, that are in charge of the enforcement of that human right to self-determination will recognize that right on our part to secede.
Honorable Kaluma, I think that will serve as your final comment. Mr. Manibe, if you could hear me, with this kind of development in Africa, I've mentioned about 6 or 7 countries, you know, where several regions there want to secede. Are we going to see perhaps a different kind of an African map come 10 or 20 years from now?
It is quite likely. It is very likely. Mm-hmm. So long as African states and especially the political elites in these countries that hold power don't address the fundamental problems of the people and don't make all the peoples and tribes and communities and nationalities in their country feel as part of that country, then the problems of secession will continue. Yes. And I believe in the future it might get easier rather than more difficult. Okay. Because I think one of the speakers has said earlier, yes. The right to self-determination is a basic human right nowadays. It is recognized, but it is the political leadership in each of the countries that tend to presume that right should not be exercised because the country is assumed to be already one nation.
Well said, Mr. Manibe. Let me now engage both Abdulwahab and Honorable Baya. You have 30 seconds each. Let me begin with Abdulwahab, your final comment.
What I'm saying basically is, South Sudan, before becoming independent, no one was predicting the Nuer against the Dinka. That's why I'm saying secession sometimes cannot bring a harmony, peace, and tranquility and development to the young nation. Similar to Somaliland. Somaliland today, you know, they're claiming they succeeded from the rest of Somalia. But one thing I can assure you, even if today African Union, together with you know, a union nation that recognize Somaliland, within the subclans, some subclans within the Somaliland are pro-unionist rather than separatist, so that they can easily go into South Sudan way again. You know, ISAC-dominated government against the rest. So what I'm saying basically is, let's, you know, Africa must think about the good governance. Africa leaders must practice what you call a good governance, rather than what you call, you know, neglecting the minorities and maybe some prophecies within the African states. Basically, the final one I'm saying that let some, you know, today, for instance, Eritrea became independent from the rest of Ethiopia, and they are not better than before. That's why I'm saying
it might be a risky move.
Let's think
yes,
about
I think you've delivered your point.
Rather than succession issues. Succession cannot bring a stability, cannot bring the peace, cannot bring what you call, you know, cannot meet the aspiration of the society as well.
Honorable Bai, you have 30 seconds. A final comment.
Final comments. There's one. The writing is on the wall. That when, like what Chinua Achebe said, when things can't hold together, they fall apart. And you realize that over the decades, empires, great empires, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and great states like the USSR all came to a level where they could not hold together because of the injustices and the things that people did not like, and they disintegrated to what we have today. Africa was disintegrated by colonial boundaries, which did not respect the will of the people. Now, that will of the people and the political right to self-determination is now being gauged against territorial integrity, which was drawn by foreign masters. Now, they did not take into account the differences that were in between communities and the aspirations that the communities have. Now, the world has come over many years, and constitutionalism and the rule of law has taken place and is ruling. And people are realizing that, yes, we have a right to self-determination. Now, the right to self-determination is being weighed against the territorial integrities. And like my friend Kaluma, Honorable Kaluma said, that African Union is a club of presidents. They will not like to have their territories carved out. But that does not stop the people from exercising their will as provided in the African Charter and the United Nations.
Thank you very much.
Last word is this.
Yes, I think you've delivered your point. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Honorable Baya, many thanks for your input. There is Honorable Owen Baya, the Member of Parliament from Kilifi North. We also had Peter Kaluma, Homa Bay Member of Parliament. Mr. Abduhab Sheikh Abdisamad, who came to us all the way from Garissa. He's a regional affairs analyst, as well as Kosti Manibe, who's a former Minister of Finance in South Sudan. Finally, let's now take a look at our proverb of the day. And finally, on our Twitter poll, we did ask you, do you believe those calling for secession have a justifiable cause? We're yet to get the percentage. I'm going to give it to you once we get them. But let me go through some of your feedback here very quickly. At Jacko Yugi, okay, who says, I support secession. We can't live in a country where winner of presidential election is not determined by the popular vote, but by a certain region. And then at Mandela Onchwati says, since independence, that's okay. It seems we're out of time here. But finally, it's time for our bottom line editorial. And here is the bottom line tonight. Observing African politics clearly reveals the continent is racked with deep divisions and increasing calls by sections of society who feel excluded from the core of state decisions. This has equally increased conflicts ranging from political protest to all internal wars within countries and externally between countries that share common jurisdictions. Now, more often than not, the squabbling is about national wealth or a region deciding unilaterally to end its association with a government because of ideological or policy differences. For example, the governments of Ethiopia and Sudan failing to address grievances of outlying regions satisfactorily for 1/2 century steered those regions to war, resulting in Eritrea and South Sudan separating to form new nations. Now, in spite of several cases of internally generated dissensions and weak governmental structures, it is remarkable that many more African countries have not been torn apart. However, the handful of cases on secession could be misleading because they offer false impression that the issues that can tear apart the relationship between a region and a central government have not been grievous or been cleverly resolved. In reality, the sorry state of relationships between regions and central governments in Africa is far from clear. In each country, regions want the central government to address outstanding issues. No government can be complacent in addressing the issues for which a region or group seeks redress. Complacency may only push the region or ethnic group to the brink by seeking separation from the union with ramifications that are hard to foretell. And that's the bottom line tonight. Many thanks for watching. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Until tomorrow, same place, same time. Enjoy the rest of your night. Bye-bye for now.